What if I told you that under the busy streets of tropical Brazilian city, a crew of men spent 3 months digging in silence and emerged with over $70 million? No alarms, no gunfire, no witnesses, just a tunnel so perfectly engineered that even police admitted it looked like something out of the Subway Project. This isn't Hollywood fiction. This is a true story. The central bank robbery of Fortaleza, Brazil. A heist so bold, so carefully planned, and so devastating in its aftermath that it's still remembered today as one of the most daring crimes in history. Stick around until the very end, because this isn't just about a tunnel or stolen money. It's about betrayal, bloodshed, and a mystery that still haunts investigators. Where did all the money go? And don't forget, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because I've got even crazier stories coming your way. It was the summer of 2005 in Fortaleza, a city of over 2 million people on Brazil's northeastern coast. By day, it was a place of beaches, fishing boats, and tourists. But behind the postcard beauty was a darker reality. The city was a hub for organized crime, drug trafficking, armored truck robberies, and kidnappings for ransom. Violence was so common that people had grown almost numb to it. And in the heart of downtown Fortaleza sat the central bank branch. From the outside, it looked ordinary. A modern concrete building with barred windows, security cameras, and guards at every entrance. But underground, it was a fortress. The vault was designed to be impregnable, with reinforced walls, massive steel doors, and alarm systems. It was here that billions of rays circulated through the economy. To rob it seemed impossible, but to a group of criminals, impossible was just another word for opportunity. Months earlier, a man walked into a modest property just 2 blocks from the bank. He signed a lease, presenting himself as the owner of a small landscaping business. The company was called Grama Sintética, synthetic grass. To the landlord and neighbors, nothing seemed unusual. Soon, trucks arrived. Men in uniforms unloaded turf rolls, soil, and tools. They set up shop. Customers occasionally came and went. On the surface, it looked like a normal business trying to get by. But the truth was far more sinister. Inside that warehouse, the gang had a different mission. Behind the piles of artificial grass, they began digging. They weren't planting gardens. They were carving out a path straight to the central bank's vault. At first glance, it sounded insane. A tunnel? Through dirt, concrete, and sewage systems? All under one of the busiest neighborhoods in the city? But this wasn't an ordinary crew. At the center was a man named Luis Fernando Ribeiro, already notorious in Brazil's underworld. He'd been tied to armored truck robberies and kidnappings. He wasn't a hot-headed gangster. He was a strategist. And for this job, he assembled a team of nearly 24 men. Each had a role. Some were experienced diggers, used to working in construction. Others were mechanics, electricians, and drivers. There were men tasked with buying equipment, forging documents, and even acting as face men to keep the fake company looking real. Unlike most heists, where crews strike quickly and vanish, this operation would demand patience, precision, and endurance. Imagine the risk. Every day, they worked just meters below the streets, one mistake away from being discovered. If a neighbor grew suspicious, if police happened to knock on the door, if the tunnel collapsed, it would all be over. But still, they pressed on. The plan was simple in theory, but incredibly difficult in practice. From the landscaping shop, they would dig a tunnel that stretched across a city block, nearly 80 meters, about the length of a football field. At the end of it, they would break through the vault's concrete floor from below, bypassing all the alarms and guards above. But digging such a tunnel was no small task. The men faced soil that shifted, walls that threatened to collapse, and the constant problem of where to put the dirt. Each day, they removed sack after sack, disguising among landscaping supplies and hauling away in trucks. At night, they worked by lamplight, crawling through narrow passages, hammering and shoveling in suffocating heat. To reinforce the walls, they lined the tunnel with wood and plastic. To keep the air breathable, they rigged up ventilation systems. Electrical wires ran along the ceiling, powering light bulbs. What they were building wasn't a crude hole. It was an underground passage that could rival professional engineering. Neighbors sometimes heard noises late at night, muffled thuds, vibrations. But when they peeked in, they saw men in uniforms and trucks hauling turf. Who would suspect anything more? For 3 long months, the crew toiled underground, their hands blistered, their clothes soaked with sweat, their nerves frayed. Every shovel of dirt brought them closer to the vault, and closer to fortune. Finally, in early August 2005, the tunnel reached its destination. The men paused, just a layer of concrete separating them from millions. They planned carefully, waiting for the right weekend, when the bank would be closed and no employees would be around to hear them. On August 6th and 7th, the operation began. Down in the tunnel, the men worked feverishly, drilling through the last barrier. And then, with one final push, they breached the vault floor. Imagine the sight, a gaping hole opening into a chamber stacked with cash. Bundles upon bundles of 50 real notes, neatly organized in plastic-wrapped stacks. More money than most of them had ever seen in their lives. The men moved quickly, passing the bundles back to the tunnel, loading them into trucks. For hours, the operation continued, like an underground conveyor belt of stolen wealth. By dawn, they had taken nearly 160 million rays, over 70 million US dollars, 3 tons of cash. And when Monday morning came, bank employees walked in to find the vault door still sealed. No alarms had gone off. No guards had been harmed. But the money? Gone. Brazil had just witnessed the largest bank heist in its history. On the morning of Monday, August 8th, 2005, central bank employees in Fortaleza walked into work expecting a normal start to the week. But what they found made their blood run cold. The vault, locked from the outside, was strangely lighter. At first, no one could quite believe it. The giant steel doors had not been touched. The alarms had not gone off. The guards had reported nothing unusual all weekend. Yet when the staff opened the vault, the sight was unmistakable. The shelves were almost empty. Panic set in. Inside that vault should have been nearly 160 million rays, around 70 million US dollars. But now, only scraps remained. Police were called immediately. Officers swarmed the bank. Investigators fanned out, and the media quickly caught wind. Within hours, the central bank robbery was front-page news across Brazil. The first question was obvious. How? The vault was one of the most secure in the country. It was designed to withstand explosives, drills, even direct assault. Breaking through its reinforced walls was thought to be impossible. But when investigators searched, they found the answer: a hole in the floor. Dropping down, they discovered the tunnel, a narrow, dirt-lined passage stretching nearly 80 meters underground, connecting the vault directly to the small landscaping warehouse 2 blocks away. And this was no amateur job. The tunnel had lighting, wooden supports, ventilation, electrical wiring. It had been dug with precision, carefully reinforced to prevent collapse. It was wide enough for men to crawl through, and strong enough to allow tons of cash to be hauled back. Investigators, stunned, admitted it looked less like a criminal hole and more like something engineered by professional builders. One officer described it as a work of art. Another said, this wasn't just a robbery. This was construction. The media went wild. Headlines screamed, "The Tunnel of Fortune, the heist of the century." Ordinary Brazilians, stunned, debated how such a thing could happen under the city's nose. But for the police, the investigation had just begun. Inside the fake landscaping business, they found evidence of the operation. Tools, leftover dirt, and scattered materials told the story. The men had worked here for months. Neighbors confirmed seeing trucks, workers, and deliveries. Yet nobody had thought twice. After all, it looked like an ordinary shop. The brilliance of the cover stunned investigators. By posing as a small business, the robbers had created the perfect disguise. Trucks full of soil, landscaping supplies. Workers at odd hours, just dedicated employees. The tunnel, hidden behind stacks of artificial grass, had never been suspected. But now the question became, who pulled this off? Rumors quickly spread through Fortaleza's underworld. Whispers pointed to Luis Fernando Ribeiro, a notorious criminal with ties to organized gangs. He had been involved in armored truck robberies before. But this was on another level. Police began to suspect he was the mastermind. Leads poured in, but the scale of the crime made it difficult. Nearly 24 men had been involved, each with different roles. Some had dug, some had hauled dirt, others had managed logistics, bought supplies, or rented vehicles. It was a small army of thieves, united for one purpose. And soon, the first clue emerged. One of the trucks used by the crew had been spotted making deliveries to the fake landscaping shop. Investigators tracked it down and linked it to known associates Robbery. From there, the web began to unravel. But there was one problem. The money. Of the $70 million stolen, almost none was found. By the time police raided the suspects' homes and hideouts, the cash had vanished. The robbers had dispersed it quickly, hiding it in farms, warehouses, and secret stashes. Some was laundered through businesses. Some investigators believed was smuggled out of Brazil entirely. Meanwhile, the scale of the theft sent shockwaves across the country. The central bank itself faced harsh criticism. How could such a robbery happen without triggering alarms? Why hadn't security measures detected the digging? Experts pointed out that because the thieves entered through the floor, they bypassed the bank's electronic systems. The vault doors and walls were alarmed, but the ground beneath wasn't. In a way, the robbers had found the only weakness in an otherwise impregnable system. As investigators closed in, the consequences of the heist turned bloody. Some of the men who had participated in the robbery began to die. Police suspected that once the money was stolen, greed and paranoia set in. Members of the crew turned on each other. Killings broke out as different factions tried to seize a larger share of the fortune. In one case, a suspect was kidnapped and murdered by his own partners. In another, a body was found riddled with bullets in a shallow grave. The money that had once united the crew was now tearing them apart. For investigators, this presented both challenges and opportunities. On one hand, the killings made it harder to track who was involved. On the other, the betrayals gave police leverage. Surviving members, terrified for their lives, began to talk. Little by little, arrests were made. Some suspects confessed, detailing their roles in the operation. Others were caught with small amounts of cash. But the majority of the stolen fortune remained missing. The story became international. News outlets from around the world reported on the Brazilian tunnel heist, comparing it to Hollywood films like The Italian Job. But this was no fiction. This was a real crime with real victims. Because while the money belonged to the central bank, the loss didn't hurt faceless institutions alone. Insurance companies covered some of it, but in the end, ordinary Brazilians bore the cost. The theft destabilized parts of the economy, shook confidence in the banking system, and fueled violence in Fortaleza streets. And yet, even as suspects were arrested, the mastermind himself remained elusive. Luis Fernando Ribeiro, the man many believed orchestrated the entire plan, vanished. Rumors swirled. Some said he fled the country with millions in cash. Others whispered he was betrayed and killed by his own crew. His body was never found. For the police, this was a great mystery. They had uncovered the tunnel. They had arrested dozens of men, but they had not recovered the money, and they had not caught the man at the top. By the end of 2006, Brazilian authorities estimated that less than 10% of the stolen cash had been recovered. Over 30 men were charged, with sentences ranging from a few years to decades. But the fortune itself? It was gone. And to this day, nobody knows where the rest of it went. The central bank robbery of Fortaleza wasn't just a crime. It was a turning point. A heist so bold, so perfectly executed, that it shook Brazil's underworld, its government, and its people. But if the story ended with men escaping into the night with millions, it would have been a clean Hollywood script. Instead, what followed was darker, bloodier, and far more tragic. Because the tunnel may have been the entrance to unimaginable wealth, but it also became the path to betrayal and death. In the weeks after the robbery, Fortaleza buzzed with rumors. Ordinary people joked about suddenly rich neighbors. Taxi drivers whispered about suitcases full of cash. Shopkeepers swore they saw men paying with crisp 50 real notes in bulk. It seemed like the stolen money had spread like wildfire, invisible, but everywhere. And yet, For the men who had dug that tunnel, life wasn't as glamorous as outsiders imagined. Splitting nearly 160 million rays among 24 men was never going to be simple. Who got the biggest share? Who had worked the hardest? Who deserved more? The question sparked arguments, and arguments turned into paranoia. Some believed Ribeiro was holding back more than a share. Others accused crew members of hiding bundles of cash before the group could divide it. Nobody trusted anyone completely. And with that much money at stake, mistrust became deadly. Police noticed it almost immediately. The violence, bodies began to surface. One man, suspected of pocketing an extra cut, was kidnapped, tortured, and killed. Another was found in a shallow grave outside the city, his hands bound, his body riddled with bullets. Each death carried the same message. In the world of the tunnel, loyalty ended where greed began. Investigators used this chaos to their advantage, fearful of becoming the next victim. Some crew members began cooperating. They revealed details of the plan: who had dug the tunnel, who rented the warehouse, who provided tools. But even with these confessions, the biggest mysteries remained. Where was the money? And where was Ribeiro? By late 2005, the central bank heist had become a legend. Newspapers called it the crime of the century. Talk shows debated the genius of the tunnel. Children even played games pretending to be the bank diggers. But for the Brazilian government, there was nothing funny about it. The heist had shaken public confidence. Billions of rays circulated through the central bank every year. If even its vaults weren't safe, what did that say about the system? The federal police were under immense pressure. Task forces were formed. Dozens of suspects were arrested. And yet, despite all the work, only a small fraction of the money was ever recovered. In one raid, officers found several million rays hidden in water tanks. In another, they uncovered bundles buried in farmland. But these were crumbs compared to the fortune stolen. Over 90% of the money had simply vanished. Some investigators believed it had been laundered through construction projects, car dealerships, and farms. Others suspected it had been smuggled abroad, disappearing into offshore accounts. To this day, the truth has never been confirmed. And then there was Ribeiro. Police believed he had masterminded the plan, recruited the men, and orchestrated every detail. His reputation as a calculating, cold strategist made him the perfect architect of the tunnel. But after the robbery, he disappeared. Rumors flew. Some said he had fled Brazil, living like a king in Europe or South America, quietly spending his millions. Others claimed he had been betrayed by his own partners and killed, his body hidden forever. What made the mystery worse was that some of Ribeiro's closest associates were also killed in the months after the robbery. It was as if someone or several people were systematically eliminating anyone connected to money. By 2006, the arrests numbered over 30. Judges handed down sentences that ranged from a few years to decades. But the courtrooms didn't erase the haunting feeling that the real story was unfinished. Because the truth was, most of the money was gone. The mastermind had vanished. And the tunnel, that miraculous, almost artistic construction, was now just a hollow scar beneath the city. Investigators stood inside it, staring at it with supports and dirt walls, shaking their heads. One officer said, "They built something we couldn't have imagined. They didn't just steal money. They stole time, skill, and planning, and turned it into one of the most sophisticated crimes Brazil has ever seen." Even now, years later, the robbery remains more mystery than fact. Who exactly killed the men who died afterward? How much money did each member really take? Did Ribeiro escape? Or was he buried in the same shallow ground as his partners? We may never know, but let's take a step back. Think about what this heist really meant. For months, ordinary people walked the streets of Fortaleza, never realizing that right beneath their feet, men were crawling in darkness, digging toward a fortune. For 3 months, life above carried on, cars, buses, and footsteps passing over the tunnel daily. Nobody saw, nobody heard, nobody imagined. And then, in one weekend, it all changed. A vault, considered unbreakable, was breached. The largest bank robbery in Brazilian history was complete. But it wasn't just about the money. The tunnel became a symbol of human audacity, of criminal genius, and of the lengths people will go for wealth. Some saw the robbers as villains. Others, secretly, admired their daring. But for those who died in the aftermath, and for the countless ordinary people who bore the cost, it was a tragedy. And that's what makes this story linger. It doesn't wrap up neatly. It doesn't give us all the answers. Instead, it leaves behind questions that still echo. Where did the money go? Was Robbery alive or dead? And how many men walked away rich, only to spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders? So what do you think? Was this the perfect heist or the perfect disaster? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and most importantly, turn on notifications so you never miss when I drop another unbelievable true crime story. Because next time, I'll be taking you inside another jaw-dropping heist. One that might just make this tunnel job look small in comparison. Until then, stay curious.